A Very Royal Narcissist, Part 5. If you were expecting Meghan Markle, I decided to give her a rest. Poor Meghan. This horrible, nasty H.G. Tudor fellow, beating down on her with his awful prejudice ways. What a terrible human being he must be. Instead, she gets a little respite, but don't worry, not for long. She is the gift that keeps on giving, and so we'll be returning to Ms. Markle in due course. Now it's time to turn to a different royal narcissist, and of course there are many to choose from. And he presented himself on a plate when this was originally generated back in November 2019, but still is meritorious and applicable for us to take a walk through the behaviours of this particular individual to determine whether this is another very royal narcissist. And this time, under the Tudor scope, it is Prince Andrew, rumoured to be the Queen's favourite child, as a consequence of him arriving at a time when the Queen and Prince Philip were enjoying more harmonious relations, and she was able to spend more time with him. Whether that's true or not is ultimately irrelevant with regard to this analysis, because we're going to put under the Tudor scope Duke of York, or as he's sometimes known, Randy Andy, and perhaps now the Duke of Porky Pies, which for those of you unfamiliar with rhyming slang means lies. The Duke of York was second in line to the British throne. He's now 8th. During his younger years, he earned the nickname Randy Andy on account of his fondness for the ladies, his relationships with the American actress Koo Stark and Sarah Fergie Ferguson, with whom he has 2 daughters, being 2 of his prominent relationships. He has gained a reputation for arrogance and is also nicknamed Air Miles Andy as a consequence of his lofty expenses, in particular his habit of taking a helicopter to perform official duties when he could easily have taken a car instead. For example, in 2009, he took a helicopter from his Royal Lodge home in Windsor to an engagement in Shoreham, West Sussex, at an estimated cost to the taxpayer of £6,000, roughly $9,000 or so. The journey would have taken 1 hour and 27 minutes to drive, and would have used only about half a tank of petrol for the round trip. He has received press attention for his questionable activities and business practices, which include his friendship with Tarek Katouni, who the Duke of York has known for over 10 years. Katouni is a convicted Libyan gun smuggler who also attended the wedding of the Duke of York's daughter, Princess Eugenie. His friendship with Saif Gaddafi, the second son of the former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, and his second wife Safia Fakash. He was a part of his father's inner circle. In February 2011, David Cameron, the then British Prime Minister, faced calls in Parliament to strip the Duke of his role as trade ambassador over his friendships with Gaddafi and Katouni. In October 2010, the Duke hosted a business lunch at Buckingham Palace for Saker El-Matari, the son-in-law of the now-deposed Tunisian president, Zine Al Abidine Ben Ali. Mr. El-Matari is under investigation for money laundering. He hosted trade talks with Muammar Gaddafi in 2008. He claimed expenses of £620,000 British pounds in 2010 in his role as Special Representative for International Trade and Investment for the United Kingdom, on top of the £249,000 he's paid by the taxpayer for his royal duties. Reputed multiple meetings with Ilham Aliyev, the president of Azerbaijan, an individual who has faced repeated accusations of corruption. The sale of his home, Sunning Hill Park, purchased by a wealthy figure in the Kazakh regime, Timur Kulibayev, for a £1,500 million sum after 5 years on the market, for £3 million more than the market value. Kulibayev is alleged to have used corrupt funds to make the purchase, something that he denies. In May 2016, a fresh controversy broke out when the Daily Mail newspaper alleged that the Duke had brokered a deal to assist a Greek and Swiss consortium secure a £385 million contract to build water and sewerage networks in 2 of Kazakhstan's largest cities, while working as British trade envoy, and that he had stood to gain a £4 million payment in commission. The newspaper published an email from the Duke to Kazakh oligarch Kengiz Rakishev, who had allegedly brokered sale of the prince's Berkshire mansion, Sunning Hill Park, and claimed that Rakishev had arranged duties for the consortium. After initially claiming that the email was a forgery, Buckingham Palace sought to block its publication as a privacy breach. The palace strongly denied the allegation that the Duke had acted as a fixer, calling the article untrue, defamatory, and a breach of the editor's code of conduct. In March 2011, Kay Stearman of the Campaign Against the Arms Trade told Channel 4 News, "CAAT sees Prince Andrew as part of a bigger problem. He is the frontman for UKTI. Our concerns are not just Prince Andrew, it's the whole UKTI setup. They see arms as just another commodity, but it has completely disproportionate resources. At the London office of UKTI, the arms sector has more staff than all the others put together. We are concerned that Prince Andrew is used to sell arms, and where you sell arms, it is likely to be to despotic regimes. He is the cheerleader-in-chief for the arms industry, shaking hands and paving the way for the salesman." In January 2014, Prince Andrew took part in a delegation to Bahrain, a close ally of the United Kingdom. Spokesperson for CAAT, Andrew Smith, said, "We are calling on Prince Andrew and the United Kingdom government to stop selling arms to Bahrain. By endorsing the Bahraini dictatorship, Prince Andrew is giving his implicit support to their oppressive practices. When our government sells arms, it is giving moral and practical support to an illegitimate and authoritarian regime, and directly supporting their systematic crackdown on opposition groups. We should not allow our international image to be used as a PR tool for the violent and oppressive dictatorship in Bahrain." Accordingly, the Duke of York has either embraced or moved within circles of individuals of questionable reputation. Might this just be the hazard of being a prominent royal and something one comes across in the role of special representative for international trade and investment? Or is this pattern indicative of someone who has no issue with such individuals, who has a broken moral compass, no emotional empathy, haughtiness, a sense of entitlement, and a rejection of accountability? These questions have found an answer as a consequence of the Duke of York's friendship with the deceased convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein and the repeated allegations that the Duke of York was involved in the sexual abuse of a young girl. In March 2011, it was reported that the Duke's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, an American financier and convicted sex offender, was producing a steady stream of criticism. Sarah, Duchess of York, disclosed that the Duke helped arrange for Epstein to pay off some of her debts. The Duke was photographed in December 2010, strolling with Epstein in Central Park during a visit to New York City, according to the Daily Telegraph, a British newspaper, while negotiating this financial help. In July 2011, the Duke was reported to have cut all ties with Epstein, and the Duke's role as trade envoy was terminated that month. In January 2015, there was renewed pressure for Buckingham Palace to explain the Duke's connection with Epstein. Peter Osborne, writing in the Daily Telegraph newspaper in January 2015, stated that the proven facts are grim enough. What was the prince doing in the first place with Epstein, a paedophile who was jailed in 2008 for soliciting young girls for underage prostitution? Such a question smacks of either a terrible lack of judgment or simply not caring as a consequence of having no emotional empathy, a significant sense of entitlement, and no concept of accountability for one's actions, including one's choice of friends or contacts. The same month, Virginia Roberts Giuffre made allegations of sexual impropriety against the Duke in court papers relating to civil action in Florida arising from her connection to the Epstein case, but to which the Duke was not a party. Roberts claimed that the Duke was among men, including former Prime Minister and Alan Dershowitz, who had sex with her while she was a teenager. She alleged Epstein paid her £10,000 to have sex with the Duke. She asserted that she had sex with the Duke on 3 occasions, including a trip in 2001 when she was 17, and again in New York and on a private Caribbean island. Flight logs showed that the Duke and Virginia Roberts were in the same places she alleges when the sex happened. The Duke and Roberts were also photographed together with the Duke's arm around her waist, although Andrew's friends have repeatedly claimed that the photo is fake and edited. Roberts said she was pressurised to have sex with the Duke and wouldn't have dared object, and feared leaving as she felt Epstein, through contacts, could have got her killed or abducted. Roberts repeated the allegations against the Duke and against Epstein in a sworn legal statement under penalty of perjury. Buckingham Palace stated that any suggestion of impropriety with underage minors is categorically untrue, later repeating the denials. Lawyers for Roberts claimed a request of the Duke for a statement under oath about the allegations were returned unanswered. When the Duke was asked about the allegations by a journalist at the World Economic Forum, he refused to answer and left the room. Dershowitz said, "She's lied about me. She should not be believed about anybody else. It must be presumed all her allegations against Prince Andrew were false as well." Dershowitz initiated legal proceedings contesting the allegations, and he and Epstein were suing the lawyers representing Roberts. In response, Virginia Roberts stated that she would not be bullied back into silence. On the 7th of April 2015, Judge Kenneth Mara ruled that the sex allegations made against Prince Andrew in court papers filed in Florida must be struck from the public record. Mara made no ruling as to whether claims by Roberts were true or false, specifically stating that Roberts may later give evidence when the case comes to court. In August 2019, court documents associated with the defamation case involving Ghislaine Maxwell revealed that a second girl, Joanna Sjoberg, gave evidence alleging that Prince Andrew had placed his hand on her breast while seated with Roberts in Epstein's mansion, whilst posing for a photo with his spitting image puppet. Later that month, the Duke released a statement emphasising that at no stage during the limited time I spent with Epstein did I see, witness or suspect any behaviour of the sort that has subsequently led to his arrest and conviction. Though he expressed regret for meeting him in 2010, after Epstein had already pleaded guilty to sex crimes for the first time. By the end of August 2019, the New Republic magazine also published an email exchange between John Brockman and Evgeny Morozov from September 2013, in which Brockman mentioned seeing a British guy named Andy receiving a foot massage from two young Russian women at Epstein's New York residence during his last visit to the mansion in 2010. He then added that he realised the recipient of Irina's foot massage was His Royal Highness Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. Despite the denials, or silence, a pattern of behaviour is evident. Against this backdrop of mounting public pressure and claims which appear to have some prima facie weight, the Duke of York was interviewed by British journalist Emily Maitlis on a television programme, Newsnight, which was broadcast in November 2019. It is this particular interview which gives us considerable insight about the Duke. The following points arose from the broadcast, and I provide you with my analysis also. Number 1. The Duke of York does not regret being friends with Epstein. Prince Andrew has defended his relationship with Epstein before, including as recently as August, 2 weeks after the disgraced and now dead financier apparently took his own life while waiting trial on sex trafficking charges. Lack of awareness, lack of remorse, sense of entitlement, lack of emotional empathy. In the BBC interview broadcast, the Prince gave more detail about why he still did not regret the friendship. Notwithstanding mounting pressure and an opportunity to reconsider, the refusal to regret underlines the lack of emotional empathy. It also questions whether Prince Andrew actually has any cognitive empathy, his sense of entitlement, and the repeated need of the individual to assert control over the situation. The suggestion that he should regret his friendship with a criminal, and a particularly vile one, is challenge fuel. It challenges his sense of entitlement to be friends with whoever he chooses, and challenges his lack of accountability to be held responsible for such a poor decision. These challenge his constant need for control, and the response to this threat to control is to reject the challenge, to nullify it, and offer no remorse, no sense of regret, and no apology. The Duke said knowing Epstein had some seriously beneficial outcomes, at a time when he had left a career in the Navy and begun one as a trade and industry special representative. Deflection, improper justification, the end always justifies the means. Prince Andrew said, "The people that I met and the opportunities that I was given to learn, either by him or because of him, were actually very useful." Sense of entitlement, lack of awareness, improper justification. His reason for visiting the convicted paedophile to end their friendship? "My judgment was probably coloured by my tendency to be too honourable, but that's just the way it is," he said. Grandiosity, magical thinking, dismissive. Number 2. The Duke of York met with Epstein's ex-girlfriend recently. Prince Andrew has always said that he met Jeffrey Epstein in 1999 through the financier's then-girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, a well-connected socialite who is currently the subject of investigations with regard to her own involvement with Epstein and would form a very narcissist scrutiny under the Tudor scope. Ms. Maxwell, a daughter of the late newspaper tycoon Robert Maxwell, a deceased narcissist, has generally kept a low profile since claims about Epstein began to emerge. But the prince said that he met up with her earlier this year, before Epstein was arrested and charged over sex trafficking allegations. She was here in the UK doing some rally, the prince said. He said they didn't discuss Epstein during the meet-up. There wasn't anything to discuss about him because he wasn't in the news. It was just, we'd moved on. Flippancy, arrogance, lack of accountability. The prince stressed throughout the interview that he and Epstein weren't that close. Revision of history, deflection. Invitations Epstein had received to events at Windsor Castle and at Sandringham were in the financier's capacity as Miss Maxwell's +1, rather than as a friend in his own right, he said. Deflection, blame-shifting, splitting hairs, lack of accountability. 3. He met Epstein in 2010 to put an end to the friendship. Much of the interview with Mateless focused on why the prince went to stay with Epstein in 2010, following Epstein's conviction and imprisonment for soliciting and procuring a minor for prostitution. The prince said that the visit was to explain to Epstein that their friendship was over, although apparently he wasn't that close to Epstein, but still regarded him as a friend, and one whereby he felt compelled to fly several thousand miles to explain that the not-close friendship was now over. Contradiction, lie, compartmentalisation. This is also at odds with the allegation that the Duke was actually there negotiating for financial assistance, something which Sarah Ferguson confirmed was the case. Clearly a not very close friend willing to pay off the debts of the ex-wife of the not close friend. Contradiction, lie, sense of entitlement. He said he had considered speaking to Epstein on the phone, but decided to meet him face-to-face to show leadership. Arrogance. I took the judgment call, he said, that because this was serious and I felt that doing it over the telephone was a chicken's way of doing it, I had to go and see him and talk to him. See contradiction of other points made earlier, suggesting the use of lies. Also demonstrates a lack of awareness as to how such an interaction would appear, given Epstein's previous conviction. Number 4. Being shot at during the Falklands War meant that he had stopped sweating. The interviewer, Emily Maitlis, asked the prince for his response to allegations against him made by one of Epstein's accusers, Virginia Roberts. Roberts said that she had met the prince in 2001 when she dined with him, danced with him in a nightclub in London, and had sex with him at Ghislaine Maxwell's house in Belgravia. Maitlis pointed out that Miss Roberts' accusations were very specific and included that the prince had been profusely sweating. The prince said that a problem with Miss Roberts' story was that a medical condition meant that he couldn't have been sweating. I didn't sweat at the time because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at, and it was almost impossible for me to sweat, he said. He accused her of therefore lying. A picture revealed in the press of the Duke of York leaving China White nightclub in 2001. He's clearly sweating, and indeed sweating his tits off. In case you didn't know, the Falklands Law was in 1982, nearly 20 years earlier from Andrew sweating his nuts off, leaving China White nightclub in 2001. Lie, arrogance, revision of history, need to assert control, projection. The photograph of the Duke with his arm around Miss Roberts' waist. Prince Andrew revealed he had investigated the possibility that the photograph, or elements of it provided by Miss Roberts, was fake. In the photograph, which no doubt you've seen, certainly looks like him, but of course photographs can be doctored. But this rebuttal must be looked at in the terms of the explanation given and against the backdrop of all of the other behaviours he has exhibited. One reason the prince gave was his attire. I don't believe it's a picture of me in London because when I go out in London I wear a suit and a tie, he said. That's what I would describe as, those are my travelling clothes if I'm going overseas. However, newspapers have previously pictured the prince wearing jeans without a tie or blazer on a night out in London. Lie, contradiction, deflection, desperate explanation to assert control, denial. Speaking about the photograph with Miss Roberts, Prince Andrew told Newsnight, nobody can prove whether or not that photograph has been doctored, but I don't recollect that photograph ever being taken. Denial. He also said that he didn't believe the photograph was taken in the way that had been suggested, because it shows the prince's hand on the woman's waist. I am not one to, as it were, hug, and public displays of affection are not something that I do. The picture is at a private party, not a public occasion. Responding to the allegations that he'd spent time with Miss Roberts, Prince Andrew said, "I've no collection of ever meeting this lady, none whatsoever." Revision of history, denial. On Miss Roberts' claims that he bought her a drink, the Prince said, "I don't know where the bar is in Tramps. I don't drink. I don't think I've ever bought a drink in Tramps whenever I was there." The Prince is a bona fide teetotaler, and has been for a large part of his adult life. He said he didn't know where the bar was. However, pictures taken on multiple occasions between 1983 and 1990 place him at Tramp nightclub. This demonstrates that he has been at Tramp nightclub on many occasions, and even though he might not drink alcohol, this doesn't prevent someone from knowing where the bar is, especially in a place that is regularly frequented. Lie. Flight records from Epstein's private jet, dubbed the Lolita Express, placed Miss Roberts in London on the day in question following a whistle-stop tour from Palm Beach, Florida, to Canada, Paris, Granada in Spain, and Tangier in Morocco, before touching down in Luton on March 9, 2001. This corroborates Miss Roberts' version of events. Number 6. Pizza Express. The Duke said the day on which Miss Roberts' allegations are said to have happened, 10th of March 2001, he wasn't out in London but was at home with the children. He said he had taken his eldest daughter, Princess Beatrice, to a party at Pizza Express restaurant in Woking at about 4 or 5 p.m. And then, because the Duchess was away, we have a simple rule in the family that when one is away and the other one is there. He added he remembered the occasion weirdly distinctly because it was one of only a couple of times that he'd been to Woking, and going to the Pizza Express there was a very unusual thing for me to do. He may well have been at Pizza Express then or on another occasion. It isn't outside the realm of possibility. But given his penchant for high-end tastes and the clear lies and contradictory behaviour he's engaged in, looking at his response through that lens means that it's far from the realms of possibility. Number 7. Caribbean Orgy. Andrew's third alleged sexual liaison with Miss Roberts is said to have occurred around the time of her 18th birthday on Epstein's private Caribbean island, Little St. James. Putting the claims to the Prince, Emily Matis, the interviewer, said, in a legal deposition of 2015, she said she had sex with you 3 times. Once in a London house, when she was trafficked to you in Maxwell's house, once in New York a month or so later at Epstein's mansion, and once on his private island in a group of 7 or 8 girls. Andrew said the incidents had not taken place, but he stopped short of accusing Miss Roberts of lying. "I'm not in a position," he said, "to know what she's trying to achieve, but I can tell you categorically I don't remember meeting her at all," he said. Denial, revision of history. "I do not remember a photograph being taken, and I've said consistently and frequently that we never had any sort of sexual contact whatever." Circular argument, repeated assertion of the need for control. In a 2015 legal deposition, Miss Roberts said that she and Andrew had sex during an orgy on the private island with other girls, who she said looked under the age of 18, who didn't speak English. These allegations were struck from the record in the United States. Flight logs show that Miss Roberts arrived in the United States Virgin Islands on April 11th and then took a boat transfer to Epstein's private island next door. A group, including Miss Roberts, Epstein, Maxwell, and a finance manager turned aspiring politician called Gwendolyn Beck, then departed the island 5 days later for Epstein's mansion in Florida. The court circular doesn't indicate where the Prince was during this period. However, by April 15th, Easter Sunday, he was reportedly in the Bahamas. He had been absent from the Queen's Easter service at Windsor Castle, and a courtier told the Daily Telegraph that he was on holiday at the exclusive destination, about a 2-hour flight, away from Epstein's island. Miss Beck, a Donald Trump fan who was given thousands of pounds by Epstein when she unsuccessfully ran for Congress in 2014, said she had been on Little St. James in the days preceding April 16, 2001. In a previously unseen email to a freelance journalist sent in 2015, she claimed the Prince arrived very late at night, stayed for the following day, and left early the following morning. "He was in the bungalow next to me," she claimed. "I heard no strange noises or anything unusual. If anything, he was flirting with me, but as I mentioned before, I was in love with someone else. Boundary violation, sense of entitlement." Finally, with regard to the interview itself, one particular moment encapsulated what the Duke of York is. There was a moment towards the end of the interview with Prince Andrew when Maitlis was unable to conceal her astonishment at what she was hearing. Did he, Miss Maitlis had asked, feel any sense of shame at his association with the convicted child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein? The Prince's reply was, Do I regret that he, Epstein, has quite obviously conducted himself in a manner unbecoming? Yes. Unbecoming, said Miss Maitlis incredulously. He was a sex offender. By labelling the conduct of a convicted sex offender as unbecoming demonstrates without any doubt that the Duke of York lacks both emotional and cognitive empathy, no sense of remorse, and blames Epstein for his behaviour, but does not offer any recognition or acceptance for his own behaviour by being and staying friends with Epstein. Of course, it suited the Duke to do so. It enabled him, through sex and money, two of the most potent ways of manipulating people, to assert control, and Epstein granted access to those two things, just as the various dubious rulers and businessmen have granted access to financial resources, as detailed earlier in this video. The response to this interview was almost universal condemnation, bewilderment, and the conclusion that it made matters worse for the Duke. Former Buckingham Palace press officer Dickie Arbiter described the interview as excruciating. Asked about the Prince's decision to be interviewed by BBC Newsnight's Emily Maitlis, Mr. Arbiter said he thought many questions would be asked in Buckingham Palace. He said, "They will be wondering, was this the right decision? Was the right decision made? Who made the decision to put him on? Did he make it himself, or did he seek advice within the palace?" My view is he bulldozed his way in and decided he was going to do it himself without any advice. Sense of entitlement, arrogance, I know best. Any sensible thinking person in the PR business would have thrown their hands up in horror at the very suggestion that he puts himself in front of a television camera to explain away his actions and his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, continued Arbiter. He added that the interview was not so much a car crash, but an articulated lorry crash. Mr. Arbiter said he believed the interview would have an impact on the Duke of York's relationship with various charities. The BBC's royal correspondent, Johnny Diamond, said that the Prince was very damaged by the interview, and the opportunity to clear his name had failed badly. Royal biographer Angela Levin said that she was gripped by the interview, but felt it was ill-judged to offer insights into his life with Epstein. Unfortunately, she said, it was a sign of his arrogance. He's always been arrogant. The Queen's motto is don't complain, don't explain. I think in her heart she'll be extremely embarrassed. I know for a fact Prince Andrew doesn't listen to his advisers. A very senior member of the press team left suddenly 2 weeks ago, and the implication is he would not have approved of what Prince Andrew did. Arrogance, haughtiness, poor listener, lack of awareness, wrecking ball behaviour. Yet, notwithstanding observations such as those described, the Duke of York stands by his decision to take part in an interview about his links to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, sources told the BBC. Rigidity of approach, lack of awareness, always knows best, need to maintain control to the repeated challenge responses of commentators and observers. People close to Prince Andrew said he wanted to address the issues head-on, and did so with honesty and humility, magical thinking, grandiosity. But what did the British newspapers make of the interview? It was, the Financial Times wrote, one of the royal family's most misjudged forays on television, eclipsing even those of Prince Charles and Princess Diana on the collapse of their marriage. Always knows best, lack of awareness, sense of entitlement. From the newspaper, it was the Newsnight horror show, one of the weirdest royal interviews ever. The Guardian stated that the Prince faced disbelief and fury on both sides of the Atlantic over the defence of his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. It said that he was under growing pressure from his critics here in the United States to apologise to Epstein's victims. In the paper's own view, there was a grotesque mismatch between the Duke of York's language and demeanour and the gravity of the allegations. Lack of emotional empathy, lack of cognitive empathy. But the Daily Mail reports that the Prince has told friends he regrets he didn't make it clear he had great sympathy for anyone who was abused by Epstein. False contrition, too little too late. When I said I was shocked, I thought that was implicit. He is quoted as saying, lack of emotional empathy. The Mail's Richard Kay says, the jaw-dropping insensitivity of it all left millions of viewers, not just in Britain but around the world, asking, why? Well, Richard, the answer is at the end of this video. Why on earth had he agreed to do this, and what was he thinking? He describes the interview as one of the most egregious acts of self-harm by any member of the royal family. According to the Sun newspaper, the Prince told the Queen that his interview had been of a great success. It was, the paper says, his craziest claim yet. Grandiosity and magical thinking. The Times newspaper says that Buckingham Palace insiders, while taken aback by the reaction, believe it will be possible to judge the impact of the interview only after the dust has settled. They were bracing themselves at the time for several days of negative publicity. In the Times' view, Prince Andrew's broadcast equivocations were an embarrassment and a disgrace, said the monarchy stands mired in scandal as a result. His position is probably irretrievable, it suggests, adding, the first step in extricating the monarchy should be his retreat from a public role and a long period of silence. The Telegraph's main cartoon shows a puzzled diner at Pizza Express in Woking inquiring about a dish on the menu. That's our new one, the waitress replied. It's called the Alibi. And in its editorial, the Telegraph newspaper stated that as an exercise in making a bad situation worse, it has few equals. Since Prince Andrew saw this interview as an opportunity to put the record straight, it is surprising that he was so ill-prepared for the line of questioning, it says. It's got nothing at all to do with being ill-prepared and everything to do with his arrogance, lack of accountability, and sense of entitlement. The Duke of York has exhibited through this interview and his behaviours previously a complete lack of emotional empathy, intermittent absence of cognitive empathy, arrogance, haughtiness and being dismissive, boundary violation, the exhibition of the need for control, the exhibition of a threat, the exhibition of a response to the threat to the need for control, the telling of lies, deflection, false contrition, lack of remorse, improper justification, the end always justifies the means, lack of awareness, always knowing best, silent treatment, sense of entitlement, lack of accountability, objectification, revision of history, blame shifting, projection, circular argument. There is clear evidence, time and time again, of his narcissism. What then of his cadre? He has a taste for the expensive, is quite clearly an individual who is known for repeated sexual liaisons. He likes the high life. He has a keen interest in money and getting his hands on it no matter what is required. He's not the brightest of individuals, and whilst he may have some more intellectual pursuits, they rank far behind his somatic tastes, and it's very clear that he is a somatic narcissist. What about his school? His arrogance, his haughtiness, his love of the good time, his superficiality, the false contrition that was occasionally manifested, his lack of remorse, the improper justifications that he advanced, the fact that he basically goes through life like a wrecking ball, bowling people out of the way, that he's gruff and haughty, is quite happy to be on the take, indicates, alongside the fact that he has elevated status and financial success, that he would be appropriate not as a greater, because he has no self-awareness, no Machiavellian behaviour, doesn't operate an appropriate facade, and he does not have the intellect associated with the greater narcissist. Mid-range is a possibility, but ultimately he's not passive-aggressive enough. And he is not intelligent enough, nor operating sufficient facade to be upper mid-range, although his haughtiness and arrogance is at home there. Within the lesser, he's clearly not an out-and-out loser that's lower lesser or middle lesser, but his rampant sense of entitlement, his desire to transgress boundaries in the pursuit of money and sex, the fact that he demonstrated no remorse and at times didn't even appear to really understand what he'd done wrong, all points that he belongs within the lesser category. But given his superficiality and his running around in terms of getting the best deal for Andrew, along with his sexual proclivities, means that he is a narcissist. And he's an upper lesser type A somatic. The Duke of York is indeed a very royal narcissist, and once again, not one commentator, television broadcast, or newspaper, for all their condemnation and amazement, was able to identify precisely what was driving his behaviour. But now you all know. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening. Prince Andrew. It won't stop. If you have not already done so, you should listen to A Very Royal Narcissist Part 5, which is an analysis of Prince Andrew, explaining why his behaviours identify him as being a narcissist. It includes a detailed analysis of his behaviours over a period of time, including the catastrophic and completely ill-considered interview that he undertook with Emily Maitlis last year. that sets the scene and foundation for understanding more about his behaviours. Of course, Prince Andrew has found himself in the news repeatedly as of late, and twice this week. As the BBC reports, the Duke of York's military titles and royal patronages have been returned to the Queen, Buckingham Palace has said. Prince Andrew, 61, will also stop using the style His Royal Highness in an official capacity, a royal source said. It comes as he faces a US civil action over sexual assault allegations, claims he has consistently denied. Two fronts have opened up as against Prince Andrew. The continuing claim brought by Miss Giuffre, and, of course, now the stripping of his various titles. How will all of that impact upon him as a narcissist? I will explain to you. The article explains that a source close to the Duke said he would continue to defend himself against the case brought in New York by Virginia Giuffre. Of course, he will do so because the presentation of that claim is a threat to his control, and his narcissism tells him that he's done nothing wrong. A judge in the city ruled on Wednesday that the case brought by Miss Giuffre could continue after the prince tried to have it dismissed. Buckingham Palace said in a statement, "With the Queen's approval and agreement, the Duke of York's military affiliations and royal patronages have been returned to the Queen. The Duke of York will continue not to undertake any public duties, and is defending this case as a private citizen." All Prince Andrew's roles have been returned to the Queen with immediate effect, and will be redistributed to other members of the royal family, a source said. A spokesman for the Ministry of Defence said it had no comment about the Duke's military titles being handed back to the Queen, and that it was a matter for the palace. On Thursday, a letter released by anti-monarchy pressure group Republic was signed by more than 150 Royal Navy, Royal Air Force and Army veterans asking the Queen to strip Prince Andrew of his 8 British military titles. That would also, of course, be a threat to control. The response from Buckingham Palace has been swift and almost brutal. The royal family is being firmly distanced from the toxic fallout from the allegations against Prince Andrew. He will have to defend himself against Virginia Giuffre as a private citizen. There will be no more His Royal Highness in this court case. This again demonstrates the canny operation of the Queen, who recognises that she is going to have to cut him adrift in order to preserve the status of the royal family. That as a consequence of the allegations against him, he of course is free to continue to defend himself against that, but thinking ahead, the Queen sees the potential for the sustained claim now being not knocked out as a consequence of the suggestion that it could be, under the terms of the agreement, the settled agreement between Jeffrey Epstein and Victoria Giuffre, or rather Virginia Giuffre, means that the Queen realises that at this point it's simply untenable for him to maintain those titles under increasing pressure, and it starts to stain the royal family further. Moving swiftly and in a canny response, she is ensured to protect the royal family as much as she can, cutting him somewhat adrift. The article explains this is claimed to have been by mutual agreement, stepping back rather than something imposed, but the military titles and royal roles will go to other members of the family, which means they won't be coming back to Prince Andrew, whatever the outcome. The door is being closed on a return to public life. It's not yet clear if this applies to his constitutional role as a Councillor of State, one of 4 royals who can undertake the Queen's official duties should she be unwell. The court case will still make headlines, and there will be concerns. It could cloud a Jubilee year, but this unambiguous decision will have already answered the inevitable calls for his removal from his remaining public roles. Prince Andrew has strongly denied any wrongdoing, and his representatives say that fighting the case is a marathon and not a sprint, although this must feel like a huge and rapid retreat. The Duke had a 22-year career in the Royal Navy and served as a helicopter pilot during the Falklands War. The latest palace announcement means he has lost military titles, including Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, one of the most senior infantry regiments in the British Army. The other UK military titles he no longer has include Honorary Air Commodore of RAF Lossiemouth, Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Irish Regiment, Colonel-in-Chief of the Small Arms School Corps, Commodore-in-Chief of the Fleet Air Arm, Royal Colonel of the Royal Highland Fusiliers, Deputy Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Lancers, Queen Elizabeth's own, Royal Colonel of the Royal Regiment of Scotland. The Duke also had several overseas honorary roles, including Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Highland Fusiliers of Canada and Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal New Zealand Army Logistic Regiment. But he will retain his service rank of Vice Admiral, the Palace has confirmed. As an ex-member of the armed forces, he was promoted in line with his still-serving peers and made Vice Admiral by the Navy on his 55th birthday in 2015. The Duke was due to be promoted to Admiral on his 60th birthday in 2020, but asked to defer this after stepping back from public duties in 2019. At the time, the Palace said his other military appointments had been suspended. The chair of the House of Commons Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, welcomed the return of the Duke of York's military titles and royal patronages. He told the BBC's Newcast podcast that the Duke's change in status ahead of the US civil case was necessary to protect the reputation of the military. Prince Andrew already had stepped back from many of his public duties, I think all of them as well, so I think this was anticipated. Indeed, it was expected. From this perspective, so I'm not actually surprised. It's important that the problems that Prince Andrew has incurred aren't bled over into the regiments that he was representing, Mr. Ellwood said. Journalist and former BBC royal correspondent Jenny Bond said she had not anticipated the Prince losing the titles. Clearly, pressure has been asserted on him, and pressure on the Queen was growing for some action because of the disquiet within the military, and people beginning to say, "We don't want to toast his health" at the end of regimental dinners, she said. Miss Giuffre filed a civil case in New York in August 2021 under the state's Child Victims Act, which allows survivors of childhood sexual abuse to pursue a case which otherwise would have been barred because too much time had passed. In court documents filed as part of her civil case against Prince Andrew, Miss Giuffre said she was the victim of sex trafficking and abuse by the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. She alleged that part of her abuse involved being loaned out to other powerful men. Miss Giuffre claims the late billionaire financier trafficked her to have sex with Prince Andrew when she was 17. She alleges the Duke abused her on 3 occasions, both in the UK and the United States, when she was a minor under United States law. In an interview with BBC Newsnight in 2019, the Queen's second son said that he had no recollection of ever meeting Miss Giuffre, denial, and her account of them having sex in the US and UK didn't happen, denial, rejection of threat to control. The Duke withdrew from public life shortly after the interview, assertion of control by withdrawal, which he used to repeat his denials of Miss Giuffre's claims and explain his one-time friendship with Epstein and the late financier's girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell. Last month, Miss Maxwell was found guilty of recruiting and trafficking underage girls to be sexually abused by Epstein. The failure, of course, to reject Miss Giuffre's claim amounts to challenge fuel. It will have bewildered Prince Andrew and infuriated him. The 46-page judgment that was handed down by Judge Kaplan was a very firm rebuttal of the points advanced on behalf of the Prince by his attorneys. Of course, this was not a determination of the claim in its total, but it meant that an opportunity to take the legs from beneath the case by stating that it was barred because of the terms of the settlement agreement between Jeffrey Epstein and Miss Giuffre failed, and therefore the claim must continue. And that failure, documented in a judgment, will amount to challenge fuel. It will be challenge fuel because it contains emotive language, which is directed towards Prince Andrew. Although it's not a huge amount of fuel because it's the written word, it's fuel nevertheless, and the fact that it defeats his application or motion means that it challenges him. His reaction to that, of course, would be to need to nullify that threat to control. He can't do so directly. He's not going to address Judge Kaplan and tell him that he's an arsehole and doesn't know what he's talking about in the way that some narcissists might do. Instead, behind closed doors, Prince Andrew would bemoan the failure to his lawyers, possibly lashing out at them, accusing them of incompetence and not doing their job properly, such is the haughty reputation by which he goes, and undoubtedly complaining to those that will listen that he's been the victim of a witch hunt. That indirect smearing of the judge and Virginia Giuffre will allow him to have an unconscious sense of control indirectly. Furthermore, hard on the heels of this defeat in court, the stripping of the titles will wound him. The removal of this status will cause significant wounding to Prince Andrew, and similarly will threaten his control. The removal of the titles has no fuel attached to it, and therefore that is why it wounds. And if you'd like to understand more about the three interactions between the narcissist and you as a victim, then you ought to listen to the excellent material, The Three Interactions with the Narcissist, which you'll find in the Knowledge Vault. Link to the Knowledge Vault in the video description. The removal of the titles provides no fuel and wounds him. Again, he will be infuriated. His fury will be ignited by this. However, he will not lash out against his mother because of the other factors where his narcissism recognizes that he needs to keep on good terms with her. Instead, he will now be like a caged beast, strolling around, stampeding about behind closed doors, raging and ranting and complaining. He will doubtless be involved in behind-the-scenes tirades, but he is being kept away and has to be because the Queen cannot and will not countenance further risk to the reputation of the royal family by Prince Andrew going off on some public tirade. He, of course, was advised not to do the interview with Emily Maitlis. He didn't listen. Doubtless he's received legal advice which tells him to take this in a particular direction. He will not listen. He is arrogant, haughty, and believes that he is always right. And he will not be able to comprehend why this claim is being brought and why it has not ended yet. He will lash out, describing other people as incompetent, that they are biased against him. His victim mentality will come to the fore, not as much to the extent as it would with a mid-range narcissist, because he is not one, but nevertheless, like any narcissist, he does have a victim mentality. He will regard Virginia Giuffre's claim as baseless, because his narcissism will tell him that it's baseless. He will believe that he's been stitched up. The paranoia of the narcissist will take him in that direction. He believes that he is being diddled by a money-seeking liar. He will see himself tainted by the association with Maxwell and Epstein, although, of course, he was perfectly content to bask in the benefits of their friendship once upon a time, the residual benefit of connections, money, and possibly other things if the allegations prove to be true. Now, of course, the sun has set on those relationships. Epstein convicted of being a sex offender and dead, and Maxwell awaiting sentence for her own convictions. The association with Prince Andrew also presents a challenge for him, because he's tainted by association with them. The problems continue to stack up for him, and he cannot go on the offensive. He's not allowed to. You might wonder, why does he not launch himself out there as a loose cannon? Quite simply, his narcissism is ensuring this is kept in check. It is quite unusual for a narcissist of his school, but the reason that it's happening is one huge residual benefit, and the issue of control. He is essentially potless. He has had to sell the villa, the skiing villa that he had, and he has significant legal liabilities, not only in terms of the legal bills that he's going to have to pay, but the potential for a large damages claim being made successfully against him. He has, of course, his own ongoing costs, and of course, as a consequence of the scandal that is associated with these allegations, people have been and will continue to distance themselves from him, and therefore the lucrative deals that he once sought to do, shady as they were, see A Very Royal Narcissist Part 5, will dry up, and therefore he becomes all the more reliant upon Her Majesty the Queen for financial support. A loss of financial support would be a threat to control, and therefore, as you know, his narcissism needs to assert control over all appliances at all times. And therefore, in order to avoid the threat to control posed by financial impecunity and the fact that he's reliant upon the residual benefit of financial support from his mother, his narcissism is not going to cause him to attack the Queen, nor to go on a rampage which would cause problems for her. And instead, he remains that caged beast, kept away, kept largely out of the public eye, now stripped of his titles, ready to continue to fight the case. He will look to stymie the case any way that he can, to prevent it from proceeding. Whether he succeeds yet remains to be seen. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening. Prince Andrew, Part 3. Court Control. Hello. I'm H.G. Tudor. I've explained in earlier parts of the Prince Andrew series that he is a narcissist and the reasons why. And of course, he remains in the news as a consequence of the ongoing court action brought by Virginia Giuffre against him. Recently, as an attempt to nullify that threat to control, Prince Andrew's lawyers issued a motion and application to have the claim struck out. It failed. And therefore, that failure, of course, means that the action remains live, it remains a threat to his control, and will be igniting his fury. Unlike a certain other very royal narcissist, Andrew, for reasons that I've explained in Part 2, has remained largely out of sight. However, the continuing existence of this claim continues to threaten his control and also means that he will appear in the news. Once again, Prince Andrew is trying to use the court, as many narcissists do, for the purpose of assertion of control. We've seen with Harry's wife how she utilises court action and is particularly litigious, bringing actions against the Sun newspaper, against Associated Newspapers Limited, making threats of legal action in order to assert control. And where a narcissist is wealthy, they will invariably engage in litigation, the lawyers being hired guns to bring about an outcome in order to nullify a threat to control or to assert control over somebody else. Other narcissists that can't necessarily afford a lawyer end up representing themselves and invariably appear as vexatious litigants. What now is happening with regard to Prince Andrew in terms of court control, and what does that tell us about his narcissism? Well, the BBC reports Prince Andrew denies close friendship with Ghislaine Maxwell in US court files. Prince Andrew has denied being a close friend of convicted sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell in a legal response to the woman who is suing him in the United States for sexual assault. Of course, he denies being close friends with the woman who is pictured in the background smiling of the infamous picture showing Prince Andrew, Virginia Giuffre, and Ghislaine Maxwell in 2001, although of course Prince Andrew has explained that he has no recollection of that photograph, and indeed there is an inference that it has been fabricated. Of course, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that it is a doctored photograph, but for the moment, assuming that it is accurate, it does portray a picture of someone that at least knows her. Does that make him a close friend? No, of course it doesn't. But then, of course, she was seen repeatedly appearing at events with Prince Andrew, and of course was invited to stay at Balmoral, where there is a picture of her and the late Jeffrey Epstein relaxing, pictured together, and of course they have only been able to attend that as a consequence of the invitation of Prince Andrew. He maintains that she is not a close friend, and in so doing, his narcissism is utilising the first line of the twin lines of narcissistic defence, which is denial. Very easy to use. That didn't happen. No, I did not. No, that's wrong. No, no, no. Denial, denial, denial. When you say to the narcissist, you've been cheating, or you've been stealing my money, or you've been saying horrible things about me, or you didn't look after the children this weekend as you said that you would do so, that amounts to a threat to the narcissist's control. And one of the swiftest, easiest, and generally effective responses is for the narcissist to say, "That's not true. No, I didn't. That didn't happen," and to deny it. It's a standard response. And the narcissist will continue to do so until you back down and accept that you're wrong, in which case you then give control to the narcissist. Of course, if you persist, you might break through that denial. And I've explained in the video, The Twin Lines of Narcissistic Defense, how that works, and I'd encourage you to go and listen to that. Therefore, Prince Andrew maintains a denial that he's a close friend of the convicted sex trafficker, notwithstanding appearing in the photograph that I've just described, also the appearances of Ghislaine Maxwell at Balmoral, and also the suggestion, as reported by Insider, a former Buckingham Palace Royal Protection Officer says he suspected Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew had an intimate relationship, according to a new documentary. A former Royal Protection Officer said in his first TV interview that the Buckingham Palace staff suspected Prince Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell had an intimate relationship. From the way she was allowed to enter and exit the palace at will, we suspected that she may have had an intimate relationship with Prince Andrew, the former officer Paul Page said in a new ITV documentary, Ghislaine, Prince Andrew and the Paedophile. A colleague of mine remembered her coming in 4 times in one day, from the morning till the evening. She kept coming in and out, in and out. The Duke of York's legal tensions have mounted following the December conviction of Maxwell, a British socialite who was found guilty of 5 of 6 sex trafficking charges brought against her. Of course, this is just the witness testimony of one individual, and it remains to be seen whether Mr. Page is an independent, unbiased witness. But let us assume that he is. The fact that Ghislaine Maxwell apparently was able to go backwards and forwards as she did does suggest that she was more than just an acquaintance, more than just a friend, and does support the proposition that she was a close friend. Nevertheless, Prince Andrew's narcissism maintains that she is not, because his narcissism recognises that it's a threat to control, so he'll issue the denial. The plausibility of that denial is questionable, and you'll have witnessed this with many narcissists, that the denial that is issued often lacks credibility, or in other issues, or rather in other instances, it has increased plausibility, and this is often linked to the subschool of narcissists that you're dealing with. Lesser narcissists will issue a barefaced denial, often in face of contradictory evidence. The shrug of the shoulders, "What do you expect me to do about it?" "So what?" "No, I didn't." Mid-rangers will probably give you more of a story, and graders, of course, will be entirely convincing in such a way that the denial holds tight. With Prince Andrew, as his status as an upper lesser, he, of course, issues a denial that lacks credibility. The way that his narcissism has evolved is that it is not particularly cultivated, it is not particularly sophisticated. As an upper lesser type A, he's dismissive. There are other things that he wants to get on with, that he is involved, his energy chasing down new prospects, new deals, in pursuit of, unconsciously, the prime aims. He basically hasn't got time for this Mickey Mouse bullshit, and therefore just issues a denial, irrespective of how plausible it may seem. Returning to the article, the Duke of York has consistently denied all the allegations against him, reports the BBC. Miss Giuffre alleges he assaulted her when she was 17 at homes owned by Maxwell and paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. But in the 11-page court document filed on Wednesday, Prince Andrew's legal team lists a number of reasons why they believe her civil lawsuit should be dismissed. Accordingly, having failed last time around to have her claim struck out, they're trying again. Is this the smack of desperation? Is it somebody who's got great big round balls trying this? No, it's simply the case that he honestly believes that he hasn't done anything wrong, that his claim is a crock of nonsense, and therefore his narcissism guides him to repeatedly deny it and instruct his lawyers to get rid of it, make it go away, and therefore another application is made. The article continues that with the legal team of Prince Andrew, one factor they ask the court to consider is the issue of consent. The document says, assuming, without admitting, that Giuffre has suffered any injury or damage alleged in the complaint, Giuffre's claims are barred by the doctrine of consent. In essence, what's being stated here is, I never met her, I never slept with her, but in the event that you find that I did, well, she consented to it. Of course, this is sort of having his cake and eating it. I deny that I've ever met this woman. I deny that I slept with her. Okay, if you find that I did, well, she consented to it anyway, and therefore the claim fails. The document also states that Prince Andrew admits that he met Epstein in or around 1999, but denies that he participated in any abuse with the late financier. On the matter of a photograph of the prince with his arm around Miss Giuffre, with Maxwell in the background, his lawyers say they do not have enough information to admit or deny its existence. What their meaning is, although there is a photograph that shows him with Miss Giuffre and Miss Maxwell in the background, the suggestion is that this might be doctored, but they can't say for definite one way or the other, hence the middling stance of can't deny it or admit it. Elsewhere, the document denies Miss Giuffre's claim that Prince Andrew was a close friend of Maxwell. Writing to a US judge, his lawyers state, Prince Andrew hereby demands a trial by jury on all causes of action asserted in the complaint. US lawyer Lisa Bloom, who represents a number of Maxwell and Epstein's accusers, called this demand a PR move, saying Miss Giuffre had already asked for a jury trial. She said Prince Andrew's request was meaningless, as it was Miss Giuffre's constitutional right to have a jury trial if she asked for one. In the papers, Prince Andrew's lawyers further argue that Miss Giuffre has no legal basis to bring the case since she is a permanent resident of Australia. They also refer to a 2009 settlement agreement between Miss Giuffre and Jeffrey Epstein, a long-time associate of Prince Andrew. Epstein, a convicted sex offender, killed himself in prison in 2019 while awaiting a sex trafficking trial. British socialite Maxwell was found guilty last month of grooming underage girls to be abused by him. Miss Giuffre is suing the Queen's son for allegedly sexually assaulting her in London, New York and the Virgin Islands when she was a teenager. She is seeking unspecified damages, but there is speculation the sum could be in the millions of dollars. Earlier in the month, the judge ruled that the case could proceed. Buckingham Palace later stripped Prince Andrew of his military titles and patronages and said he would contest the case as a private individual. See parts passim for more observation on that. The new court documents describe the Queen's second son as Prince Andrew, Duke of York, aka Andrew Albert Christian Edward, in his personal capacity. In a statement, David Bowes, who is representing Miss Giuffre, said his client and legal team look forward to confronting Prince Andrew with his denials and attempts to blame Miss Giuffre for her own abuse at his deposition and at trial. The case naturally continues, and each time that it manifests, it's a threat to control, and therefore Prince Andrew's narcissism needs to make it go away, hence another court application. He will continue to slog away at this, utilising everything that his wealth and prestige allows him to do to make the threat posed by this claim disappear and enable him to nullify it. But at the moment, he has not succeeded. But it shows once again his narcissistic response of continuing a barefaced denial, even though, of course, there is evidence that suggests the contrary. Often, you will have found where you were involved with the narcissist, you couldn't believe the fact that the narcissist stands there denying something when you've evidence to the contrary. But what you must understand, that is in the world of the narcissist does not stand there, when lesser or mid-range, thinking, I know this evidence shows that I've done it, but I'm going to tell a lie. Their narcissism protects them by causing them to honestly believe that it didn't happen, that you're wrong, that he was never in that photograph, that it was doctored, that he isn't a close friend of Ghislaine Maxwell, even though there is evidence that suggests that he is. He will argue there's a matter of interpretation, that other people might see us as close, but she wasn't. Yes, I met her a few times, but that doesn't mean that I was a close friend of hers. Driven by that need to nullify threats to control, reject accountability, and operate with that sense of entitlement, his narcissism will continue to issue these denials. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening. Prince Andrew, Part 4. Meatloaf Fury. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. An interesting article came my way on Yahoo News which merited further observation for the purposes of understanding the behaviour of Prince Andrew and to provide you with examples of understanding more about the behaviour of an upper lesser type A. The article has the headline, and it's written by Patrick Sproul, Meatloaf said Prince Andrew once tried to push him into a moat after he caught Sarah Ferguson paying attention to him. As you know, Meat Loaf, the Grammy-winning singer and actor, died, age 74, just recently. And in 2003, he revealed that Prince Andrew once tried to push him into a moat over the attention of Sarah Fergie Ferguson. The altercation took place at a 1987 charity tournament featuring the royal family and celebrities. Mr. Loaf, the rock star and actor who died last Thursday, aged 74, said he was once almost pushed into a moat by Prince Andrew over the attention of Sarah Ferguson. The singer and actor, whose real name was Marvin Lee Aday, participated in the 1987 televised charity tournament It's a Royal Knockout, filmed at Alton Towers. Members of the royal family competed in teams, alongside celebrities like John Travolta, Sheena Easton, Cliff Richard, and John Cleese in a bid to raise money for charity. In a 2003 interview with The Guardian, Meat Loaf said that it was great fun. I had a great time, but joked that the Queen hates me. He revealed that he caught the attention of Sarah Ferguson, Prince Andrew's wife, prior to their divorce in 1996. Fergie wasn't exactly flirting with me, said Mr. Loaf, but she was paying attention to me, he said. And I think Andrew got a little, I could be wrong, I'm just reading into this, I think he got a little jealous. Anyway, he tried to push me in the water. He tried to push me in the moat. So I turned round and I grabbed him. And he goes, "You can't touch me, I'm royal." I said, "Well, you tried to push me in the moat, Jack. I don't give a shit who you are. You're going in the moat." Meat Loaf's death on Thursday was announced in a statement released on the Star's Facebook page. Our hearts are broken to announce that the incomparable Meat Loaf passed away tonight with his wife Deborah by his side, it said. Tributes from the entertainment world poured in. Cher, who recorded Dead Ringer for Love with him, honoured the star, tweeting, "Had so much fun with Meat Loaf when we did Dead Ringer. I'm very sorry for his family, friends and fans. I may imagine it, or are amazing people in the arts dying every other day." Prince Andrew is currently facing a sexual assault lawsuit filed in August last year by Virginia Roberts-Giuffre, who alleges that Jeffrey Epstein forced her to have sex with Andrew in Epstein's New York mansion in London and on Epstein's private island in the US Virgin Islands. Buckingham Palace announced last week that Andrew would face the lawsuit as a private citizen and that his military titles and royal patronages would be removed. Thus, the article ends. Now, what does this tell us? Well, let us assume that Mr. Loaf's recollection is entirely accurate. There's no reason to think that he would be lying about this. And therefore, what is going on? Well, he turns up at the event, and I can imagine that he'd be quite an ebullient and outgoing character, and he's having a bit of chat with the flame-haired Sarah Fergie Ferguson. She's not at the stage of getting her freckled bangers out. Maybe that was on the cards if the interaction had continued, but she's chatting away with him. Now, of course, at that juncture, Fergie was the intimate partner primary source of Prince Andrew. She was the individual that was determined by his narcissism to be the best provider of the prime aims. The easiest one to control, the one that provided the most fuel, the one that provided excellent character traits and residual benefits. And in the circumstances, she was harnessed for those purposes. However, when she's talking to Mr. Loaf, two problems arise. The fact that she's not talking to Andrew telegraphs that he's not important. Now, it's not the case that Sarah Ferguson is deliberately trying to suggest to her husband, "I don't like you, you're unimportant, you don't matter, you're a nobody." She's simply talking to Mr. Loaf. However, the fact that she's doing that from the perspective of the narcissist is interpreted by him as telling him that he doesn't matter. That's why you will have found that in certain social situations, if other people are talking to you and not the narcissist, you may well have noticed an adverse reaction from the narcissist. For instance, try to draw attention back onto themselves by talking about themselves, or causing a scene by knocking something over, or perhaps sitting and sulking. All of those are reactions to the threat to control posed by the fact that attention is on you rather than on them, or that your attention, as a meaningful part of the fuel matrix, is directed elsewhere and not upon the narcissist. And that was the case here. Sarah Ferguson, as the intimate partner primary source, was giving fuel to Mr. Loaf. Now, it's not the case that Mr. Loaf necessarily needed fuel. However, Where you're talking to somebody other than the narcissist, in our world, that's effectively wasted fuel and signals to us that we don't matter. There is a threat to control because, in effect, we regard it as you ignoring us. Of course, your intention is irrelevant. You may well not be ignoring us, you're just engaging in normal social discourse with another person. But it is interpreted by the narcissist that you're effectively ignoring us. You become painted black. And also the individual that is occupying your time, here, Meat Loaf, is similarly painted black. Mr. Loaf may well have been a tertiary source, possibly non-intimate secondary source, but most likely a tertiary source with regard to the It's a Royal Knockout. Because Prince Andrew's control of Sarah Fergie Ferguson was being threatened, that meant that his narcissism needed to motivate him, to cause him to take action, to nullify the threat posed to control by the conversation going on between Mr. Loaf and Sarah Fergie Ferguson. It might have been the case that he could have gone over and said to Fergie, I just need you for a moment, and he pulls her away, and thus he nullifies the threat to control and brings her attention back onto him. Some narcissists would respond in that way. Andrew doesn't bother with a facade, however, as an upper lesser type A, and rather goes in a affable arsehole kind of manner. He is well known for sort of buffoonery and tomfoolery, thinking that certain practical jokes are hugely amusing, and therefore it's entirely envisageable that he did go across and basically attempt to push Mr. Loaf into the moat. That would, of course, assert control directly over Mr. Loaf by shoving him into the water, in effect giving him a corrective devaluation. Him sliding into the moat would allow Prince Andrew's narcissism to have a sense of control over him, and would also receive fuel from no doubt the spluttering and annoyed reaction of Mr. Loaf. It would also mean that Fergie's attention would be back on Prince Andrew, all problems solved, appliances brought under control, threats duly nullified. However, of course, his attempts to get Mr. Loaf into the moat didn't reach fruition, and instead he tried to push him in the water, but it didn't work. And instead Mr. Loaf turns around and grabs Prince Andrew. That grabbing of him is challenge fuel. It's an emotional response, negative in nature, but is also trying to stop Prince Andrew asserting control. As a consequence of that threat, Prince Andrew's instinctive response is to say, you can't touch me, I'm royal. Haughty, dismissive, grandiosity. Mr. Loaf isn't taking it. He's American, and he's got no time for those pesky royals. Instead, he declares, well, you're trying to push me in the moat, Jack, and I don't give a shit who you are, you're going in the moat. Unfortunately, the story doesn't tell us whether Mr. Loaf dunked Prince Andrew. I suspect that he didn't. Nor does it say what happened thereafter. It's highly likely that Mr. Loaf perhaps backed down and left matters there, didn't want to make too much of a scene, or Prince Andrew huffily strode away, perhaps taking the hand of Sarah Fergie Ferguson and taking him with her. But what this interesting article does is provide us with a lovely opportunity to see the reaction of a narcissist, whereby the narcissist is made to feel jealous by the narcissism to motivate him to take action. So, upon seeing the threat, the narcissism, in order to galvanise Prince Andrew into action, makes him feel jealousy and tells him that Mr. Loaf deserves a soaking, and therefore he's motivated to act in the way that he did. It demonstrates his sense of entitlement, his lack of accountability for his behaviour, and a lack of emotional empathy, and underpins his narcissist credentials. An excellent example of demonstrating the way that the affable arsehole would behave in such circumstances. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening. Prince Andrew, Part 5, Teddy Collection. An article from people.com, ordinarily very much in the stable of Harry's wife, provides us with something written by Stephanie Petit. The article headlines with, Prince Andrew's former maid had a day-long training on how to arrange his collection of 72 teddy bears. Yes, you heard that correctly. Apparently, a former maid was given a day's worth of training with regard to how to arrange a collection of teddy bears. This is a prince of the realm, a man in his 60s, that has a collection with teddy bears. Prince Andrew's former maid said the royal was very clear about how he wanted them arranged. Now, people collect all manner of things, don't they? Art, baseball cards, panini stickers, Star Wars figures, stamps, coins. For me, I collect people. I am the people collector, drawing them in, bringing them into my world, owning them and possessing them. But we're not going to talk about the asylum of the grotesque, which is where my people collection resides. Instead, we're going to look at a collection of a different kind, teddy bears. As I've explained, Prince Andrew is an upper lesser type A narcissist, and therefore, what is this affable arsehole, at times can also be haughty and brusque, why is he engaging in the collection of teddy bears? What does this tell us about him through the narcissistic lens, and also his behaviours surrounding it? Well, let's dive in. It may not be a picnic, but we'll endure. Prince Andrew's former maid is revealing one of the oddest parts of her job, spending an hour every day arranging his collection of 72 teddy bears. Charlotte Briggs, who worked at Buckingham Palace in the 1990s, told the Super Soaraway Sun that she was tasked with the process of meticulously putting the stuffed animals in their place on the royal's bed and around his room. As soon as I got the job, I was told about the teddies, and it was drilled into me how he wanted them, she told the outlet. I even had a day's training. Everything had to be just right. It was so peculiar. Briggs said there were 72 teddy bears from around the globe, many dressed in sailor outfits. Each day, she arranged the collection so that the biggest teddy bears were put at the back, then placed in order of size to the smallest at the front. Makes sense. Nothing wrong with bringing a bit of order to these things. Then at night, Briggs or another maid used a diagram to put the teddy bears in their designated positions around the room. The small bears were stacked in an unused fireplace, while other stuffed animals, including 2 hippos and a black panther called Daddy, Ducks, and Prince, were placed on the bed or around the room. Prince Andrew's 2 favourite teddy bears were placed on mahogany thrones at his bedside. It was so odd, Briggs said. After all, he was a grown man who had served in the Falklands, but he absolutely loved the teddies and was very clear about how he wanted them arranged. Former royal cop Paul Page talked about Andrew's teddy bear collection for the ITV's new documentary, Ghislaine, Prince Andrew and the Paedophile. It had about 50 or 60 stuffed toys positioned on the bed, and basically there was a card the inspector showed us in a drawer, and it was a picture of these bears all in situ, he said, according to The Sun. The reason for the laminated picture was if those bears weren't put back in the right order by the maids, he would shout and scream. According to The Sun, Prince Andrew reportedly said in 2010, I've always collected teddy bears. Everywhere I went in the Navy, I used to buy a little teddy bear, so I've got a collection from all over the world of one sort or another. Reporter Elizabeth Day wrote about one of Prince Andrew's teddy bears in 2019 for You magazine, recalling an oversized teddy bear in a waiting area outside Andrew's apartment when she interviewed him a decade earlier. That oversized teddy bear, Elizabeth, was probably Prince Andrew dressed up so he could cop a feel, and you just thought that it was Ted being friendly. When I was ushered in to meet Prince Andrew, I asked him about it, she wrote. He sniggered and told me it had been a wedding gift from his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson. Apparently he had found the bear waiting for him when he got into the horse-drawn carriage that he was to take them from Westminster Abbey to their reception. I remember that he found this extremely funny, even several years later after the event, she added. It seemed rather strange to me that a grown man should be so amused by the presence of a stuffed toy. So, what's all this about, then? Well, first of all, you can see, of course, the need to assert control by triangulating relevant appliances using the teddy bears, that they have to be placed in the right position. Now, in the general scheme of things, does it matter if Teddy sat on the floor or if he sat on the bed? You probably say no, because he's a stuffed inanimate object. He doesn't feel the cold of the floor. He doesn't feel the comfort of the bed. He's but a teddy bear, and therefore why does it matter? Perhaps it's for aesthetics, that, of course, if the teddy bears were all heaped on the bed, that doesn't look as good as if they were neatly positioned around the room, so an aesthetic argument carries some weight. But at the end of the day, the necessity of them being placed in a particular position, and the insistence upon the same, to the extent that a diagram is being completed, means that it is an assertion of control. And where those instructions are not followed, that offends Prince Andrew's unconscious need for control. It ignites his fury. Hence, it was reported that he would then shout and scream as a consequence of them not being put in the right place. His fury would be ignited by his narcissism to motivate him to react in that way, to think that these people were incompetent dullards, thus, with the absence of his facade, to lash out at them and rant and rave at them. Their responses would provide him with fuel, and undoubtedly they would then took the old forelock and go, "Sorry, Prince Andrew," and get them in the right position. Thus he triangulated the staff with these objects for the purpose of assertion of control. Also, the fact that he collects them is part of his ability to assert control over objects, and it mirrors the way that he unconsciously looks at people. People are objects to be picked up, put down, positioned. And if you want to know more about the way that we position you, particularly in a certain arena, you should read my book, Sex and the Narcissist, and you'll find the positioning that goes on there rather illuminating. We unconsciously, or in the case of an aware narcissist, consciously see people just the same as we would see teddy bears, or tin cans in a cupboard, or pictures on a wall, or a television set, or a washing machine. Your objects. And the advantage, of course, with teddy bears is that they do as they're told. Mr. Snookums sits in the fireplace. Duck, or Puddles, or whatever it's fucking called, gets put on the mantelpiece. Mr. Big Balls gets into the bed. And, of course, we had some grandiosity of a couple of bears that would be sat on thrones by the side of the bed. This is all done because it enables the narcissist to readily assert control. And the bear, because unfortunately kids' Toy Story ain't real, the bears don't wake up and play at night when the owner is out of the room. They do as they're told. Move the bear that way, it falls over. Pick the bear up, it doesn't protest. Put the bear over on the shelf, it will sit on the shelf until it's taken off the shelf. Kick the bear, it flies across the room without protestation. And this is what we expect from our victims, that we similarly should be able to pick you up and put you on the shelf and leave you there and take you off as we see fit. That if we kick you, you fly across the room and you do so without protestation. That if we move you this way, or this way, you will do so and you will bend to our will and you will do as you're told. Of course, unfortunately, from our perspective, you don't always accord with whether we want to position you and place you, and therefore you threaten our sense of control, and our narcissism needs us to manipulate you to get you back under control. But collections are, in this way, an observation of how the narcissist is able to control things with no threat to control. By collecting those things, the narcissist is able to triangulate. So often narcissists will have collections of things so that it can be showed off to people. Look at my brilliant collection of coins. And the narcissist will talk about them and they'll get reaction from people, which demonstrates control in the provision of fuel. There's a residual benefit. Collections can be rather worth a lot of money. But they also represent a manifestation of control because they do precisely what we want. And we regard you in the same way. And as I talk about the way that I collect people, the way that narcissists collect people, there is that unconscious expectation from an unaware narcissist that you behave like the collection, that you're there like a doll, to be picked up and positioned and used. And the teddy bear collection is a manifestation of that objectification of the appliances. So whilst, of course, it's easy to scoff at Prince Andrew for being this age and having so many bears and wanting them in a particular position, it actually affords us a very good insight into not only triangulation by object, the mindset of the narcissist with regard to collections, and, of course, the unconscious view of all of you as inanimate objects, there to do what we dictate. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening. Prince Andrew,
Part 6. King Blocker. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, continuing to educate you in an entertaining and informative way about narcissism. The royal family is providing us with a wealth of material at the moment with regard to understanding narcissism. As I've explained elsewhere, both Andrew and Charles are narcissists, and there is an explosive revelation that apparently Prince Andrew lobbied the Queen to stop Charles becoming king. The Duke of York plotted with Diana to allow William to accede to the throne ahead of Charles, royal author claims. Angela Levin, of course, is hawking around her new book, Camilla from Outcast to Queen Consort, and as part of that, there's serialized extracts being provided, and they're reported on in other newspapers. As always, I leave it for you to determine the veracity of the material. I provide you with the analysis. Here, an article by Elizabeth Hay and Martin Robinson for the Daily Mail Online focuses on this aspect. Prince Andrew secretly plotted with Princess Diana and his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson, surely Sarah Fergie Ferguson, to try to prevent Charles becoming king and allow Prince William to take the throne with the Duke of York as regent, an explosive new biography claimed today. This would, of course, show a rampant sense of entitlement on the part of Andrew, no emotional empathy whatsoever for his brother, a lack of accountability for his behaviours, and, of course, manipulations in terms of manipulating Charles out of the way and acting in tandem with Fergie and Diana. Andrew is also alleged to have lobbied the Queen, hoovering, direct assertion of control, and campaigned against the marriage between Charles and Camilla, interference in relationship, lack of boundary recognition, absence of emotional empathy, sense of entitlement, haughty behaviours. Now King and Queen Consort telling his mother that she was not trustworthy. That was about Camilla. He wasn't telling the Queen that she wasn't trustworthy. Important to be clear about these things. Angela Levin's new book on the life of Camilla, serialized in the Telegraph, claims that the Duke of York was very nasty to her and conspired with Princess Diana to prevent the Queen's eldest son from becoming king. Under Andrew's alleged plan, William would have been lined up for the throne, with Charles pushed out, and Andrew made regent, residual benefit, if the Queen had died before William was 18. Citing a senior insider, Ms. Levin writes that the Duke of York plotted with Diana to push Charles aside with the aim of Prince Andrew becoming regent to Prince William. Andrew lobbied very hard with the hope that Charles would not become king when his mother died and that William would wear the crown, she said. This, of course, is an exhibition of Andrew's envy as him being a spare. And because there's a lack of emotional empathy for his brother and the need to assert control, this manifestation of the envy causes him to actively plot with his own ex-wife and Diana in order to prevent Charles becoming king. It's a brazen move, and moreover, it wasn't one, in keeping with the style of narcissist that he is, that he didn't keep quiet either, because he lobbied the Queen also. A senior insider at the palace is said to have told Ms. Levin, when Diana was alive, through her friendship with Andrew's wife Sarah, Duchess of York, she plotted with Andrew to try to push Prince Charles aside, so Prince Andrew could become regent to Prince William, who was then a teenager. They were dark and strange times where paranoia became reality, and this was a worry. His behaviour was very, very negative, sense of entitlement, malice, and extremely unpleasant to Queen Elizabeth, who disagreed. I was told it was one of the rare occasions he didn't get his way. Now, of course, it's often been reported that Prince Andrew held the status of favourite amongst the children. That may well be right, but even here, the Queen as a normal resisted these overtures. She exhibited not only emotional empathy for those affected, namely Charles, but also, of course, her chief concern would have been the preservation of the monarchy and the natural order of matters. Returning to the article, nonetheless, he was apparently very angry, ignited fury, that he couldn't rule the country in some way. He remained so hostile to Camilla's emergence and acceptance that it's doubtful it has ever been forgiven. Buckingham Palace and representatives for the Duke of York have been contacted for comment. Ms. Levin also wrote about the Duke's hostility to Charles's marriage to Camilla, claiming Andrew was poisonous and very nasty about her to the late Queen Elizabeth. Indirect assertion of control. He wasn't able to go over and say, right, you two fuckers, you're not getting married. Agreed? That's not going to work. He's not going to be able to go over to Camilla and say, look, you old hag, you're not marrying jug ears. Got it? And that she would comply with it, or to go over and grab his brother by said lugs and say to him, now listen, I'm bigger and harder than you, and I could twat you in a moment, but I'm going to let you off, so long as you don't marry old horseface there. You can well imagine Prince Andrew behaving in such a way because he's so brazen, but his narcissism directed him not to do that because it will have perceived that it would not have been met with success. So instead, his narcissism guides him to assert control indirectly over both Camilla and Charles, non-intimate secondary sources in Andrew's fuel matrix, by causing him to go to Mummy and saying, Mummy, they're horrible, they're nasty. Apparently she does nasty things in the middle of the night with animals. Therefore, he smears both Camilla and Charles, particularly Camilla, to his mother in the anticipation of causing his mother to act in a particular way and asserting control over Queen Elizabeth directly, but also in the expectation, his subconscious expectation, that she would agree that Camilla isn't a nice person, and thus that would allow him to indirectly assert control over Camilla. The insider said he tried to persuade the Queen to block Charles marrying Camilla by being quite poisonous, mean, unhelpful, and very nasty about Camilla. These claims allegedly included that Camilla was insufficiently aristocratic and was untrustworthy. In 1990, when Charles turned 50, a party was thrown, but the Queen and Prince Philip declined in case Camilla was there. Camilla's close friend, Lucia Santa Cruz, said, when Camilla was married to Andrew Parker Bowles, she used to go to Balmoral with him and join the royal family. They got on marvellously well with her. But when the marriage failed and she was with Prince Charles, she was rejected and got all the blame, which was so unfair. The Duke of York and King Charles have reportedly had a strained relationship over the years. Not fucking surprising if he's trying to bump him off the throne, which has worsened dramatically since Prince Andrew's ties to paedophile Jeffrey Epstein emerged. When Buckingham Palace announced in January that the prince would be stripped of all his military titles and patronages, wounding, and would defend his sex abuse case against Virginia Giuffre as a private citizen, it was understood the now king had been instrumental in influencing the decision. There, Charles is asserting control over Andrew, and undoubtedly his narcissism would be reminding him with some whispering, do you remember when he lobbied against you being king? Do you remember when he said that your missus wasn't suitably aristocratic, was untrustworthy? Nail the fucker. Here's your chance. Get your own back against him. And his narcissism will have guided him that way to then, in concert with his mother, to say, look, he's bringing shame on the family by being a perv. We need to strip him of his military titles. At the time, the article continues, palace sources said the ruthless and swift decision had been widely discussed within the royal family, following Andrew's failed bid to persuade a judge to dismiss the civil lawsuit. Prince Charles and his son William were understood to have been instrumental in the move to force him out of being an active member of the royal family. Charles was said to have spoken to his mother, direct assertion of control by hoovering, by telephone to share his thoughts on the decision. An inside source at the palace said at the time it was a ruthless and swift decision which will have been recommended by the Prince of Wales and the Duke of Cambridge and sanctioned by the Queen. It was later reported in February that Charles had told his brother to stay out of sight at official events, further assertion of control over his brother, one which he complied with for reasons that I've explained in the earlier section of Prince Andrew versus Harry's wife. Prince Andrew has since reached a settlement with Miss Giuffre in which he did not admit any wrongdoing. Angela Levin has previously published biographies of the royal family, including Prince Harry in 2018 and on Prince William and Kate in 2015. Yada yada. Plug for the publication. Here, this shows knock-on-knock action, with the envious, brazen, nasty behaviours of Prince Andrew attempting to stop his brother, if this information is correct, from becoming king and smearing Camilla. Further aspects of the narcissistic dynamic and giving you further insight into what Queen Elizabeth, as a normal, had to put up with and deal with. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening. Prince Andrew, Part 7. King says no. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. Now we have an example of when narcissists collide. On the one hand, we have Prince Andrew, who doesn't operate with a facade, who is full of bluster, out for himself, and doesn't really care that people can see that. Behaves in an obnoxious manner, but you're the little people, so you ought to deal with it. Can be charming to certain people around him, but seen as an arrogant arsehole to other individuals that he engages with. Has poor boundary recognition, witness the video analysis of him with his daughter at the funeral. And of course, all of the swirling allegations with regard to his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein and the fallout involving Miss Giuffre. On the other hand, we have King Charles III, who does operate with a facade. There are occasional cracks in it, as have been seen as of recently, for instance, the stink over the ink. He, however, operates with a greater level of control over his ignited fury. His narcissism recognizes the benefit that exists through service and through being king and the relevant ways that that serves the prime aims. His narcissism also engages in what's called narcissistic cementation, which, if some of you had watched my recent interviews, you'll understand more about that to help you understand the dynamic between him and Camilla. And if you want to know more about that, I'd invite you to go and watch my most recent interviews. Here we have Prince Andrew clashing, in effect, with King Charles. Of course, King Charles needs to assert control over his brother, and is able to do so by virtue of being king. The Times explains the Duke of York was left in tears when his elder brother told him shortly before the Queen died that he was permanently banished from royal duties. It was claimed yesterday. The reaction, of course, of Prince Andrew is that he's crying for himself. Whilst the sub-school of narcissist that he is not one that's often given to tears, it can occur, and it was in fact a pity play. Feel sorry for me so that I can gain control, although, of course, that's not the way that he sees it. The Prince of Wales, as he then was, ended his brother's hopes of a return to public life during a face-to-face meeting described as emotional and fraught. Those close to Prince Andrew are now understood to be concerned for his well-being, saying that he has become a virtual recluse. If you'll recall in parts passim, I've explained with Prince Andrew that his narcissism recognised that it was better asserting control through a position of withdrawal with the expectation of securing benefits as he does so, for instance, financial support from his late mother. The fact now that him staying out of the way isn't going to garner any reward with regard to a return to royal duties, of course, is a threat to control. It makes him feel weak, and when King Charles or Prince Charles as he then was, explained that to him. It affected his sense of control, made him feel vulnerable, and his response by his narcissism wasn't to kick off, wasn't to punch his brother in the head and say, "You jug-eared twat, you should let me back in," but it was to start blubbing. Presumably he went off and hugged his teddy bear collection thereafter. The Times continues. The meeting, held at Charles's Birkhall estate in Aberdeenshire, was said to have left Andrew stunned. He believed that he could still be of value as a working member of the royal family despite his association with the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. That demonstrates the level of sense of entitlement, delusion and grandiosity of Prince Andrew. A royal source said Andrew was totally blindsided. He is utterly bereft, only for himself. He always believed that there was a way back, delusion. Andrew has been left more isolated by the death of his mother, who was his chief supporter. Therefore, the loss of that non-intimate secondary source, his mother and the fuel matrix, of course, has left him with a hole. Now, he has other people that are providing with fuel, but the status and support that came with the monarch basically being on his side was very useful for him in terms of asserting control over other people, and the loss of that causes him a problem. The article continues. Andrew was extremely close to the Queen and tried to raise the issue of his return to public life many times with her. Sense of entitlement, assertion of control over his mother. On some occasions, she would say mildly conciliatory things, but most of the time she would change the subject immediately to avoid talking about it. The Duke was stripped of his official duties over the Epstein scandal, and as a result will not be involved at Sunday's remembrance service at the cenotaph. Although senior figures in the royal family had thought the matter settled, that there was no way back, this had not been Andrew's understanding, again demonstrating his sense of entitlement and delusion. Naive as it may sound, or more appropriately, entitled as it may sound, he always had hopes of regaining his position as a senior royal, the source said. At the meeting, Charles told him that he can go off and have a good life, a nice life, but that his public life as a royal is at an end. He was told, "You have to accept this." Charles asserting control, and of course doing so over his brother, in order to preserve the monarchy, which of course is very much an extension of Charles. Charles recognises, by being a different type of narcissist, that the behaviour of Andrew would impact upon the monarchy and therefore on him, and affect his own sense of control, although, of course, he doesn't see it in such exact terms. The article continues. In January, Andrew was divested of his military affiliations and royal patronages, all of that which would wound him, after he lost his attempt to quash a civil lawsuit in America brought by Epstein's former sex slave, Virginia Giuffre, who claimed she had been forced to have sex with the Duke. Andrew denied her claims, but the Queen removed his titles. He also lost his right to be addressed as His Royal Highness in an official capacity. He settled a civil case in February for a reported £12 million without accepting liability, assertion of control by nullifying that threat to control through financial firepower. Andrew had believed this would allow him to return to royal duties, delusion, sense of entitlement. Until the face-to-face meeting with his brother, Andrew believed that there was a way back, that somehow he could be rehabilitated and play a role in the firm going forward, the source said. He came out of the meeting shaken. He's still in shock. He's completely lost and very depressed. This is the effect of the threat to control upon him. The Mail on Sunday said it understood that Andrew was later reduced to tears again when, in a separate conversation, he was informed that he would not be allowed to wear military uniform at his mother's funeral, another challenge. The source said, "He cannot comprehend there is no place for him in public life. He has a support system, but he is in bad shape. He's finding it hard to process the reality of how life will be from now on." Andrew has become a virtual recluse, according to the source, who adds he has no idea what the future holds and has no real plans. He's struggling to accept this is the end of the road for him as a royal. It is all he has ever known. And of course, the removal of what he has only ever known is a significant threat to his control, with the consequential impact upon him, as described. What do people think about this? Philip Schneider writes, below the line, "He's over 60 with a nice pension. Get real. No one feels sorry for him. He is lucky to have escaped the clink." Paul Bickerdike responds, "He was never charged with any crime. How is he lucky to escape the clink? Being found guilty on social media doesn't even count, even in the United States." Robert Knott, Prince Andrew's inability to read the room has never been more manifestly evident, and that's saying a lot. And, of course, that's part of his narcissism, his haughtiness, his arrogance, his dismissiveness. He just bowls forward, like a wrecking ball through life. And Fleming responds to that. He never thought it was necessary to read the room. He was, in his mind, an elevated sort of human being to whom mere mortals would grovel and fawn while he wafted through their rooms. As his whole self-image is based on this royalness, then he must be completely hollowed out. Oh well, maybe Sarah can bring him down to real life. Polar Bear, he may have wept, but he definitely didn't sweat. Mark Pearson, sorry sir, you can't sit here eating pizza and making the floor wet. Don't want any slip-ups here, do we? Card writing. Andrew was totally blindsided. He is utterly bereft. He always believed there was a way back. Andrew appears to have difficulty with comprehension. Alice in Ordnung writes, he's a bit thick, even by the standards of the royal family. Ithaca, well, this is the man who thought the mateless interview had gone well. This is all demonstrative, of course, of low cognitive function, but combined mainly with his arrogance, dismissiveness, and belief that he's always right and everybody else is wrong. James Glynn, if he thought he had any sort of future working as a working royal, he must be delusional. Though he is said to have thought his interview with Emily Maitlis went well, so I suppose we knew that already. Shooter, Maitlis wrote in this here rag that he was a very plausible witness and she thought the interview went well and so did I. That picture with his arm around that G-woman was obviously doctored. I hear he's an entitled brat, but even brats deserve better. Jeremy Westhead, that he was blindsided says everything you need to know about the man. Chris Frankland, pompous, arrogant man, utterly convinced of the existence of droit de seigneur. Run along, there's a good chappie. Richard Evans, if he wants to be of use, there's plenty of charity work he could be doing, not big engagements, but small local stuff. But as some real effort over a number of years, maybe people might detest him a little less. Alternatively, keep playing golf and riding horses and enjoying a comfortable retirement in a style most of us will never afford at our expense. No sympathy for Andrew in the below-the-line comments, although one or two people pointing out they don't think he's guilty of what he was accused of. But what he is guilty of course, is being a narcissist and a rather obvious wrecking ball type. And he's come up against another one who has been able to assert control by virtue of being king. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.